Now the one nice thing about iData, when you flash your module, you can download your instruction manual. And if you've done, let's say in this, we do tons of Jeeps. Don't always rely on your old instruction guide. Always check to see if there's a new instruction guide. For example, this is the latest, and down here on the bottom of the page it says 2017, meaning this is the latest version. And this is the previous install guide, and there is a difference between the two, and that's right here in the reverse wire. This module will detect reverse wire, hopefully. This module, flash, it doesn't. It also tells you down here this is a 2015 instruction guide. Anytime you do one, always get the latest instruction guide. For those of you that have never done one before, the nice thing about their instruction guides on page 5 here, it's going to go through and tell you what each one of the wires is for on this harness. They do use factory colors, meaning the colors are designed to match up with your Pioneers and your Kenwoods. If you turn the page, it'll go ahead and talk to you about those wires, where the wires are, what they do, what color they are, the factory color on the other side if need be. All the information is here to make it I'm not going to say painless, but hopefully answer any questions you'd have trying to do this by yourself. As far as their harness goes, they go ahead and they do use some Tessa tape. This is an improved harness as they've switched to Tessa tape. They do a pretty good job of this harness making as much sense as possible. If you don't want to tear it apart or tear into it, you don't have to. This one allows you to just plug in here. So we're not going to have to rip into this harness and redo it because it's where we want it to be anyway. So that's cool there. What we do have to do though is get this radio mounted into these cool brackets. Fortunately for us today, this Kenwood has a very long face. Because it's a motorized 7-inch face, it sticks out a lot. We're not going to run into the problem that we normally run into with these, where these stick out further than the radio face. Most of the time they stick out something like this and they look terrible. With this, we're not going to have to worry about that. If you don't have something like this though, do check out some of our other Jeep installs or Chrysler installs where we actually go through and show you how to modify this. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you want to look at it, we don't have to do that on this one. Alright, so make sure you go ahead and check your spacing, make sure that these are nice and level. Luckily for this one actually mounted the easiest we've ever had. We'll go ahead and set this aside. We're going to get this wiring harness wired up. You guys have seen enough of those. Let's go ahead and join Fernando doing the Bluetooth mic. Fernando, as you saw, finished up putting in the mic. We retained the factory location. You can't retain the mic, but you can retain the location. Factory GPS antenna goes right here on this ledge, so we put our GPS antenna here if we're using one. The microphone wire is going to run down and across here, so it just comes down this pillar. We also leave the factory mic up here in this, just on clips from here, and then we just tuck it up in here, so if we need to put the factory one back in, it's not lost, it's just right there, just clip it. It doesn't bang around or anything like that. It's really tight up in there. We have the lower portion of the dash back together. Here's your USB HDMI jack. The OBD2 plugs in, and then we zip tie it up, we cover it in loom, and it comes out of the dash right here through the side. There's a bunch of factory wiring right here that you can zip tie into and run it with, and it just comes up along this area here. The harness is all set and ready to go. Hooking your radio up to a Maestro, one thing to keep in mind is that most of them have some form of steering wheel control input. Like on a Pioneer, it's the 1/8-inch headphone jack. On the Kenwood, it's the blue yellow wire. Those don't get hooked up when you're doing this, because that all gets carried over the data connection, and it has nothing to do with the old school plug it in or wire it up. Don't start freaking out when you're hooking this up going, hey, what do I hook this blue yellow wire up? I know in the box there was a piece, but he told me not to use it and it's not in the instructions. What do I hook it up to? You just don't hook it up. The last piece of this puzzle, we want to get this harness all zip tied into place where it's gonna be. Plug all these harnesses in. When I say get it where it needs to be is that we're not going to leave these plugged in. We're going to unplug these before we take it into the car, because one thing with iData is that the last thing you do is plug in the smart module. Plug into the car, you plug into the radio, then you plug in your smart module. And then depending on which car you're putting in, there is some form of a setup usually. It might just be passively set up, meaning it sets up itself, or there's a process you have to go through. And that's all going to be described on page 3 of the instruction manual. When wiring up my harness, when it comes to these two black data connections, these two black cables here, the 4-pin and the 8, I don't like taping those into my harness because it's not part of the harness to begin with. It stands alone. It's just a habit. I don't do it with steering wheel control when I harnesses either. I don't want them to be in this group of cables. Alright, so as far as getting the radio prepped and ready to go in, we're good. We can go ahead now and plug everything in, get this thing screwed in. The one last modification we are going to have to do is that he has one of those top mount cell phone kits, and because we've removed the bracket, this metal bracket that was right here, in order to fit the radio into this area, we're going to have to bolt that into the actual plastic. To mount this big guy here, what we're going to do is we're going to take a piece of 1/8 inch ABS and a bolt. We're going to come up through the bottom, and then we'll simply just use a washer. We'll add a lock washer, and of course a nut on top of that. So we can get this into the car and wrap this install up. We'll start with plugging in the factory wiring harness, separating out the wires as much as we can so things aren't as tangled. There's a ton of stuff that's gonna have to get plugged in here. Grab our backup camera, plug those into the power connections we put in. For that, we are using the accessory off the radio. Get our radio now and start plugging in all those connections. Always just take a couple seconds and look at the back, go over what you have going on mentally in your head to see if you've forgotten anything. Look into the dash. We like to go over the sources, check, make sure we have FM antenna. There's a lot of stuff plugging into the back of this, so you want to make sure it's all plugged in. Once you're positive that you have everything you need, plug in the Maestro module and make sure that they're all plugged in tight. Then go ahead and turn it on. Let's walk through the finishing steps of this. You get to pick your colors. If you see that you get tire pressure on here, then you know the Maestro is connected. You can tap on it. It'll show you if your doors and whatnot are open. That's a good sign things are going well. Now we want to go to the radio, make sure we get sound. Steering wheel controls, make sure you test those. Now we want to grab a USB and we'll plug in an iPhone and make sure, because he's doing CarPlay. Most radios you'll see us check the CarPlay, whether it has Android Auto or Apple CarPlay. We always check CarPlay because we have iPhones, and what we're doing is we're not necessarily checking to see if the service works. What we're doing is check and see that the microphone works. It's the easiest way to do that. What's the weather like today?
It's currently cloudy.
So we have a functioning unit. Get this guy up in the dash. For this install, we use that pack backup camera. It comes out of the center hole here. What we need to do is I'm going to open the back door. I can see the front screen. I can see it's crooked. So now what I have to do is pop the camera out of the housing, and there's an arrow on it that is going to dictate what is up. But of course, you just need to work with it a little bit. When you're done, you just push it in flat and you're all set, ready to go. We did remove the cigarette lighter, so we go ahead and tape that to the top of the radio. That way when he's ready to go back to factory, if he does, he'll know where it's at, right on top of his radio. We good, Fernando?
We good.
Now we're just gonna go ahead and remove all our seat covers and fun stuff like that. Get this guy out of here. Go show him how to use it. On to the next one, right?
On to the next one.
Hot damn.